American physicist and naturalist George Greenstein amazingly conceded that as we survey all the evidence, the thought insistently arises that some supernatural agency, or rather capital agency, must be involved. Is it possible that suddenly, without intending to, we've stumbled upon scientific proof of the existence of a supreme being? Was it God who stepped in and so providentially crafted the cosmos for our benefit? After examining all of the evidence, the unbiased observer would have to answer that question in the affirmative. The scientific evidence, reason, and common sense all point to a supernatural entity. Unfortunately, Greenstein went on to voice that he doesn't hold to that conclusion. Many people just can't bring themselves to accept the obvious conclusion that results from the evidence. In this seminar, my goal has been to show you that naturalistic, atheistic evolution is far from fact, even though it's taught as fact. Macroevolution, cosmic evolution, lacks evidence, and in fact contradicts the evidence, as we have seen. All the while, supernaturalism harmonizes with the evidence and is demanded by the evidence. Theistic evolutionists attempt to fill in the gaps that exist in naturalistic evolution by invoking God, but they do so without scriptural support, and they do so unnecessarily, since evolution is riddled with issues. Recall this chart from previous sessions. It highlights fundamental planks of evolutionary theory and the opposing stance that the creation model takes. If any one of these planks can be shown to be untrue, the entire model collapses. And yet we found in previous sessions that the first four of these planks contradict the laws of science. And if anything can be said to be scientific, it'd be the laws of science. The creation model, however, was found to be in keeping with the evidence. Next, we examine the alleged evidences which are said to substantiate evolution and prove that humans evolved from an ape-like ancestor. We found that Darwinian evolution's supposed evidences fall short in proving evolution, which means that evolution remains in the realm of irrationality, having no solid evidence to substantiate it. In our last session, we found that uniformitarianism is false. Catastrophism fits the evidence better, a theory championed by creationists. We also briefly looked at the concept of deep time, the proposition that the universe is extremely old and therefore could allow for evolutionary theories to take place. The evidence that's put forth to attempt to support that idea comes from evolutionary dating techniques, which we saw are flawed at a fundamental level and simply don't provide support for an old universe. But keep in mind that while each of the 7 planks of evolution are refuted by the evidence, the creation model has no problem with the evidence, and such should be the case if it is indeed the truth. But naturalistic evolution is self-contradictory. Think about this. Naturalists require natural explanations for everything in the universe, but when they examine the evidence from nature and find that, for instance, life comes only from life in nature, and matter and energy don't pop into existence and create themselves in nature, and creatures reproduce according to their kinds in nature, they ignore that evidence from nature and proceed to postulate unnatural explanations that contradict the evidence from nature. Naturalism, therefore, is a blind faith. It's the religion of many scientists today, and it's self-contradictory. There's a reason why the Bible says that the fool has said in his heart, there is no God, Psalm 14:1. That's not intended as a rude statement or a jab or an insult or name-calling. It's a purely logical, rational statement, a conclusion from the evidence. The idea is that the evidence is so clearly in favor of the existence of God that a person would have to be a fool to deny it. Like a person who doesn't accept that the world is round, or that believes the stars in the sky are gods, or that superheroes or vampires or the Harry Potter world exist. A silly individual bent on denying the obvious, rejecting the evidence. Listen to this quote by the late Colin Patterson a few years ago. He was the senior paleontologist at the British Museum of Natural History in London at the time, and considered to be one of the world's foremost experts on evolution. In a speech to his evolutionary colleagues at the American Museum of Natural History in New York, he said that he had been considering anti-evolutionary ideas for several months. He said, quote, "One morning I woke up and something had happened in the night, and it struck me that I had been working on this stuff," that is, evolution, for 20 years, and there was not one thing I knew about it. That's quite a shock to learn that one can be misled so long. Either there was something wrong with me or there was something wrong with evolutionary theory. Now notice, the famous evolutionist Colin Patterson, who wrote a textbook, a well-known text on evolution, admits that nothing is actually known about evolutionary theory. Nothing's been proved. It's all based on speculation and conjecture and hope, not evidence. Uncrossable chasms exist in the theory. And as we've seen in this seminar, the scientific evidence, in fact, dismantles evolutionary theory. Probably one of the most frequent questions that I'm asked at my seminars is asked after the second or third session. When the evidence is laid out, cut and dry, where anyone can see how clear it is that atheism and evolution are not in line with the available scientific evidence, the natural question is, well, then why are there so many people who reject the truth? Surely they're not all wrong. There's so many people that don't believe the way we do about creation. If the truth of God's existence is so cut and dry, why are there so many who fail to see it? Why are there so many people who reject it? Why do so many fail to simply draw the conclusions that are supported by the evidence, as the law of rationality states? According to the Bible, those that are searching for the truth, when they hear it, they'll believe, Romans 10:17. But 1 billion people on the planet profess to be atheists, agnostics, infidels, irreligious, and so forth. 47% of Americans believe in evolution, according to a 2012 Gallup poll. That's over 150 million Americans. Why? Philosopher David Hume once said, "No man turns against reason until reason turns against him." When people want to hold on to a particular view, it really doesn't matter what you say to them. It doesn't matter how much you reason with them and how clear the truth is. You'll find the most logical, intelligent person turn on reason and become stubborn or begin sounding like a child in his imaginary world, pretending that things are the way he wants them to be, blindly and passionately holding to his faith. But why? Why would a person turn against reason simply because it goes against his thinking? Why is the truth rejected? The Bible has much to say on that matter, but it's not very PC. The Bible, God, clearly isn't concerned with being politically correct. He's interested in the truth, even if it hurts to hear it, Acts chapter 7. Even if it's hard to follow, Matthew 19. Even if it's hard to understand, 2 Peter 3:16. Even if it's offensive, John 6, or is divisive, Luke 12:51-53. Why is the truth rejected? The answer to the question is the same today as it was in Jesus' day. Why did so many reject the truth Jesus articulated? If the truth is rejected in general, it's because there's a sincerity problem. What? How dare you make that accusation? How can you judge someone's heart? Can you read their mind? No, I can't read minds, and I understand that that concept isn't very popular. It's hard to stomach and accept that. We don't want that to be the case with people that we know and love, many of whom have passed away. But the Bible's clear on this, and we have to look inward and face the truth about ourselves. If we reject the solid evidence against our position and continue to irrationally cling to it, we're proving that we aren't really interested in truth. We're interested in something else more than we're interested in truth. We're biased. In the vast majority of cases, biblically speaking, sincerity is exactly what the problem is. And here's how we know that. Because according to Romans 1:20, for since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. God, through Paul, said that the truth is clearly seen. It's without excuse. So if people don't accept the truth, and most of the world doesn't and won't, there has to be something blinding them from seeing it, something prejudicing them. According to God, there's no excuse for rejecting the truth. Jesus said in Matthew 5:6, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled." Now think about the implications of that statement. According to Jesus, anyone who wants to know that which is right, righteousness, whoever wants to do right, will be able to find the truth. What does that say about the billions of people in the world who never come to know what is right? What is the truth? In Matthew 7:7-8, Jesus says, "Ask and it'll be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks, it will be open. That's what Jesus himself said on the matter. If Jesus said that anyone that is seeking and asks for the truth will be able to find it, then what does that imply about the vast majority of the world? Well, it must mean that they're not really looking. They're not really knocking and seeking the truth. Even if it appears that way on the surface, they must not really be as sincerely interested in the truth as it may seem. It's so easy to look around at other people in the world and assume, well, I know he's an atheist, but he's so sincere about his belief. He's nice and moral, and he's devoted himself to what he believes in. He's so passionate about his beliefs, and he sounds so reasonable. He sounds so smart. And then we start thinking, we start compromising on what we know the Bible teaches. Maybe we stop believing it ourselves, or maybe we just start adjusting it to suit our concerns, and so we can legitimize those people around us that don't accept the truth. But notice, that's just as much a prejudiced rejection of the truth as the one who does so directly. That shows just as much a bias against the truth as the atheist shows. Perhaps a few quotes will help illustrate the bias with which many in the naturalistic evolutionary community, how they approach the subject of evolution. Concerning the idea that life could come from non-life, abiogenesis, recall the quote from George Wald, evolutionist, Nobel Prize winner, biology professor at Harvard University. He said, "One has only to contemplate the magnitude of this task to concede that the spontaneous generation of a living organism is impossible. Yet here we are." Notice that evolutionists are so biased in their commitment to naturalism that they ignore the evidence that says it's impossible to happen naturally and proceed to accept naturalistic evolution anyway. J.D. Bernal, evolutionist, once again, one of the leading scientists among X-ray crystallographers, he said, "It is possible to demonstrate effectively how life could not have arisen. The improbabilities are too great, the chances of the emergence of life too small. Regrettably, from this point of view, life is here on the earth, and the arguments have to be bent around to support its existence. Evolution is impossible," he says. "Spontaneous generation, that's not possible. But we're so biased towards naturalistic evolution that we won't accept a supernatural option. We won't even consider the God option, so we'll bend the arguments to support our belief and spread it to the four winds as fact." People reject the truth because of some form of bias against it. Richard Lewontin, atheistic evolutionary geneticist of Harvard University, he was even more blatantly forthright about his bias against God and in favor of naturalism. He said, "Our willingness to accept scientific claims against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just-so stories, because we have a prior commitment to naturalism. It's not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world. In other words, it's not the evidence that compels us to believe in materialism or naturalism, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material just-so explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door." How can such a perspective be taken as anything other than biased, anything other than insincere? Who cares what science, reason, and the evidence suggest? We can't accept the suggestion of a deity. Why do people reject the obvious conclusion from the evidence? That there's a God? These quotes highlight the fact that some form of insincerity is at the root of it. Something more important to us than truth is blinding us from accepting the evidence. Boyce Rinsberger is the director of the Knight Fellowship at MIT, an ardently anti-creationist science writer. But notice his admission. At this point, it's necessary to reveal a little inside information about how scientists work, something the textbooks don't usually tell you. The fact is that scientists are not really as objective and dispassionate in their work as they would like you to think. Most scientists first get their ideas about how the world works not through rigorously logical processes, but through hunches and wild guesses. As individuals, they often come to believe something to be true long before they assemble the hard evidence that will convince somebody else that it is. Motivated by faith in his own ideas and a desire for acceptance by his peers, a scientist will labor for years knowing in his heart that his theory is correct, but devising experiment after experiment whose results he hopes will support his position. Well, I disagree that all scientists are guilty of what he claims. But what's interesting is that he's speaking in generalities about the scientific community, which is largely naturalistic and evolutionary in this day and age. According to Rensberger, they're not as objective and dispassionate as they would have you to believe. They operate on hunches and wild guesses. Throughout these sessions, that fact has been highlighted time and again. Naturalistic evolution isn't about evidence. It's about hunches, wild guesses, and bias against the supernatural, not a sincere interest in determining the truth about the origin of the universe. Aldous Huxley, from the famous Huxley family, gave us some insight into the naturalist mindset. In his article, Confessions of a Professed Atheist, he said, "I had motives for not wanting the world to have meaning, consequently assumed it had none, and was able without any difficulty to find reasons for this assumption. The philosopher who finds no meaning in the world is not concerned exclusively with a problem in pure metaphysics. He's also concerned to prove there is no valid reason why he personally should not do as he wants to do. For myself, as no doubt for most of my contemporaries, the philosophy of meaninglessness was essentially an instrument of liberation. The liberation we desired was simultaneously liberation from a certain political and economic system and liberation from a certain system of morality. We objected to the morality because it interfered with our sexual freedom." And there are more candid moments. Many atheists let the cat out of the bag and show their insincerity. They're biased against truth. Their approach of the matter of origins isn't a scientific approach. It's not about the evidence, following it wherever it leads, though they boldly and loudly claim that they, rather than creationists, are the logical and scientific ones. Should it be surprising that the majority of scientists and even a sizable portion of the population at large rejects the creation model for similar reasons? Of course not. That's the way it's always been throughout history. Well, as we wrap up this seminar, let's consider something about the nature of faith. I've shown you throughout this seminar that there's zero scientific evidence to substantiate several key components of atheistic theories. In fact, there's plenty of evidence to disprove those components. There's no evidence that life can come from non-life, or that matter can be eternal or pop into existence, or that ape-like creatures could morph into other beings or give birth to other beings. Scientific evidence indicates that these things don't happen. There are laws which stand against them. The evidence which is brought forth to try to substantiate evolutionary theory doesn't hold water. So believing in atheistic evolution not only requires believing in something without witnessing or seeing it or having any evidence to support it, it actually involves believing in something when there is a multitude of evidence against it. It's not just a leap into the dark without evidence, a leap of faith. It's a leap straight into a brick wall. As a fitting last quote, recall the famous astronomer Robert Jastrow. In his book, God and the Astronomers, he said, "For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak, and as he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries." God exists. It's rational to believe it because it's supported by the evidence. Evolution's false, regardless of the fact that so many have been brainwashed into believing it. Remember that very rarely is it the case that the majority is right anyway, especially in the realm of science. People are sheep and they follow after the people that they've deemed to be the leaders. Breakthroughs in scientific thought aren't made by the majority, but by a few rogue individuals who had the courage to stick with their convictions. Never feel pressured into believing something just because everyone else does. As the law of rationality says, go with the actual evidence. You can't go wrong with that. One final thing is worth mentioning as we close. Coming to the conclusion that God exists isn't the end of the journey. The skeptic today usually responds with, well, even if there is a God, how do you know which one? You haven't proved that that God is the God of the Bible. Why couldn't it be Allah or Buddha? Well, that's a fair statement, and one that this seminar is not designed to respond to. We have materials on our website, www.apologeticspress.org, that proves which God exists. But as a quick response, consider this important truth, which we verify again and again in our writings at Apologetics Press. The Bible alone has characteristics which prove itself to be beyond human capability. Humans couldn't have written it. A higher power is the author of that book, not humans, just as it claims. The religious materials of no other religion can claim as much whenever those materials are investigated thoroughly. I strongly recommend that you take time to investigate the truth of that statement. Please be aware that much of the material from the first 4 sessions of this seminar is available in book form at Apologetics Press. My book, Science versus Evolution, goes through the 6 laws of science that I discussed in those first 4 sessions, as well as many of the typical responses that are given by naturalists in this day and age, responses which I simply didn't have time to address in this seminar. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy life to study this important matter with me. I hope it's been useful to you. Please don't hesitate to browse our website for answers to other questions you might have, or contact our offices if we can help you in any way.
This has been a presentation of Apologetics Press, an organization dedicated to the defense of New Testament Christianity. Visit us on the web at apologeticspress.org or call 800-234-8558.